When we think about caste, we mostly think about violence. And why shouldn't we? Our history, politics, socioeconomic fabric, they're all weaved into who deserves dignity and who doesn't, who gets to marry who, and who gets to speak up and who doesn't. But today we have someone who wants us to focus on anti caste love. Jyotsna Siddharth, an actor, artist, and activist from Delhi, founded Project Anti Caste Love that acknowledges and celebrates intercaste and interreligious love. Thank you so much for joining me, Jyotsna.
Thank you, Dilpreet, for having me and being part of this conversation. I think it's much needed.
Absolutely. So, Jyotsna, on Project Anti-Caste Love, you've been collating love letters written by those in intercaste relationships and marriages. In a country where we unabashedly marry into our own castes and call it culture, what prompted you to look at the other side?
I wouldn't say that this was my original idea of love letters. I've been a student of anthropology, and even during my MPhil, I was looking at how caste interplays out in romantic relationship and what is the relationship of love. Is there a relationship of love with caste or with other social identities like religion and race? And through my sort of reviewing of literature and reading and my research, I found out that there is a lot that's been written about, say, love and race.
Hmm.
But there isn't much said about love and caste. The discourse that we have and the conversations that we have is more in context of violence, like you started our conversation with. But there is no discourse around understanding the underpinnings of,
Hmm.
say, caste and religion, and what is the relationship with love and romance, and what happens when you go on a date or court, and all of those things, and even marry or not marry for that matter.
Hmm.
So um so this sort of led me to kind of interrogate and then understand the relationship, which is still ongoing. And I think what is more easy and accessible to learn about some of these interlinkages than looking at love letters. And love letters and greeting cards, wedding cards, a lot of these things have been used to understand and to study the relationship by various anthropologists. But I wanted to kind of so when I started the project Anti-Caste Love, which was back in 2018, I did put out calls and I did reach out to a lot of people to access love letters, but that time either people didn't have, of course, rightly trust, or didn't know what the project was about. So I didn't get love letters. I think the only love letters I got was of my friends and some people who just shared those letters with me, and I just read them, but not really like shared it anywhere. So as the project has grown, I think I took that leap of faith and opportunity to ask people for their love letters. And at times, just the idea was to, whether you want to keep it anonymous or you share your identity, that is really upon the
Hmm.
people who the letters belong to. But I just wanted to kind of bring that out for all of us to, there is a merit and a value in sort of reading love letters collectively, this culture of collective reading and sharing experiences. And it's not just about my love letter or yours, but how are we reading each other's letters to understand that really some of those challenges and struggles that we're going in our relationship are about caste and religion and all of those dynamics. But we're not alone. We're all going through some of these really pressing challenges. And how do you form that sort of solidarity and relationship with one another where you feel hope and you feel there is a space to kind of learn from one another.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. So, as someone who's involved in looking at, intimacy beyond caste, what kind of stories do you come across, and do they make you believe that love has the power of demolishing caste?
That's an interesting question. I feel that, and it's also a very difficult one because intimacy for me is very fluid. It's very like, so is sexuality, right? And how do you relate with one another is really at the bottom of intimacy, which for me is beyond caste, religion, class, and beyond all of these social identities, because love is love, as we say, and we all love and we all feel hurt and we all feel pleasure and we all want to have sex and all of that. Um but when you look at the society you're living in, and when you're looking at a specific country you're living in, and the polity of that country really defines your experience of love and intimacy and sexuality. So I think for a long time, and even now, the discourse is really missing, where we feel that who I love and who I marry is really my choice, and I get to decide, or my parents get to decide. But we don't understand that state decide that as well, and politics define our understanding of love and relationships and intimacy as well, right? It's not just our parents, it's really the state which criminalizes certain relationships um and rewards certain relationships over the other. And that's where you see that love, and I keep saying that, that's why I see that love is so political, because it, as love as a phenomena, love as a feeling, is really has a power to transgress boundaries and borders and stereotypes and biases. But it's so still rooted in our social polity and in our family sort of dynamics, and it's really difficult to separate, and that's what brings in the tension. And that tension is something that I'm working with in that project, in this project, sorry.
Love is political. I really feel that, and I really that's very well put. Because it's political, it also defines the media around us, right? So, the
Mm-hmm.
entertainment industries, for example, let's take Bollywood. It's dominated by upper caste creatives and their narratives, and we really don't see films, involving Dalit, Bahujan, or Adivasi experience, for example. So, how do we try and shift the lens, because the conversation is finally happening in a way?
And yes, I mean, that is really pertinent. And I think the only way to shift this is to have more Dalit, Adivasis, more queer, trans people in the filmmaking process, in the casting process, because I'm an actor as well. And I see that the casting process, the way it goes on, there is an archetype of a character that is given to you, that okay, I want this, there is this character of a female or a man or a boy or a girl.
Mm.
But what casting directors do and what people do in the filmmaking process is that they play by the stereotypes, they play by the existing notions. So they would, a girl would mean a skinny, fair, youngish, beautiful in the stereotypical manner looking girl, where the character doesn't really say that, oh, you have to cast that particular girl. It could also be a trans girl, but our imagination and our vision doesn't go that far, because the casting directors and people who are involved in the filmmaking process do not have a perspective, do not have a critical perspective, do not have this understanding of the complexities of multiple identities and social identities of people, right? So they're constantly playing by, not by the archetype, but by the stereotype, I would say. And I think the only way to change this is to bring in more queer folks, more trans folks, more Dalit, Adivasi women across the board, to really represent and be part of the filmmaking process. So not really be subjects, but I mean, they have to be directors, they have to be script writers, they have to be actors, they have to be casting directors, they have to be makeup artists, and all of this is going to shift the discourse, and not really just even showing a film on Dalit, Bahujan, Adivasis, right? Because of course the representation is defined by who's making the film, what is their politics, who's putting in the money. So I think producers play a very important role as well. Like having some of these conversations with them is going to kind of shift that.
That's why films like Sairat or The Discreet Charm of Savarnas, they stand out, because the people who've made them have a lived experience and they have that nuance. I live in Australia now. I've been living here for 3 years, and I was born and raised my whole life in India. And sometimes when I talk about caste to people, the diaspora seems to think that caste is only a Hindu or an Indian social issue. How much truth do you think is there in that statement?
There is no truth in that. I feel like, the biggest problem, and I keep repeating myself in that hope that someday somebody will understand the basic nuance of it, is that we're 1.3 billion people in this country and everybody has a caste.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that only Dalits have a caste, you know. So so when, and everybody therefore has a caste experience.
Yeah.
So it's not, so when we're moving countries and borders, and when we're going to different places, we are taking our identities and our sociality with us.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like we're just going out there somewhere. We take our baggage, and our baggage is our personal fears, traumas, anxieties, and pleasures, and all of that. But it's also what we have grown up with, or what our socialization is, where we come from, and we take all of that with us. And again, sociological anthropological studies show that when people are away from their land, from their family,
Mm-hmm.
they reproduce those cultures and customs and traditions more strongly in order to feel a certain belongingness to their land, to their native. And I think this is also something we all feel, experience, that, when we are away from home, we feel, oh, we miss chai more somehow, or we feel we miss Indian food more. I mean, we may not miss that in India because we have ample of it around. But when you're away, you miss those tiny things. And I think culture is also very intrinsically linked and part of our being, right? And so therefore, I feel that diaspora uh, is so, I feel, not ignorant, but consciously not having those conversations around, because they feel that they left the country. So they keep the privilege,
Yeah.
but they forget that they've been part of the discrimination and continue to be part of the discriminatory system that exists in their country. And I think caste is, again, caste experience and caste based discrimination somehow has become part of that culture.
Yeah, yeah, I 100% agree with you. And I also feel like this romanticization and this, this fetishization of land when you're away from it sort of blinds your, approach towards really socially like evil issues. For example, I feel like people outside of India just want to celebrate, never rebel,
Hmm.
because it feels like it's taking us away from our culture and we already don't have one. And that's really interesting when it comes to caste specifically. Equality Labs, I'm sure you're aware of, does so much work about how there is so much caste in the US and no one wants to sort of acknowledge that. So do you think that if people outside of India and outside of South Asia start talking about caste, we are one step closer to sort of hammering the system? And if so, how do you think the diaspora can be a part of the conversation?
I really think that diaspora needs to really, really engage and learn about their history, and not just the history that is being taught in the school, but really the history of women, history of people who've been at the margins. And I think there has to be a conscious effort in going beyond what they think is culture and what their families have given them, because I think that is already very limited. And I think that uh, it is important to keep your ties as much as it's important to keep your ties with your land and connect with the people, and the the like what you're saying, that it's not just about celebrating, but also really being immersed into the social political dynamics of that country. But on the other hand, I would also say that if there are people who are part of South Asian diaspora who, and I don't know if that's my space to say, but I would still kind of put this as an alternative way of negotiating one's identity, is that if you've been part of the South Asian diaspora for you're the third or the fourth generation, and who's never been to their native land, have absolutely no connection with their native country beyond just being, have some affiliation to that land. I think why is it important to constantly evoke your South Asian identity, and perhaps not, and perhaps leaving and rejecting that identity if you do not wish to live in that land and you have absolutely no relationship with that country for generations. You know what I mean? Like, for example, Riz Ahmed, this actor, the UK British actor
Yeah.
in UK, says that he rejects his South Asian identity, and I thought that was absolutely beautiful in that sense, because it is, I mean, if I've lived in UK for so many years, I could say that I'm a British of an Indian descent, but I think it's wrong to keep saying that I'm part of South Asian community and diaspora, because I have no relationship with that country. I do not want to live there. I do not understand what's going on in that country. I've absolutely not updated myself with where that country is. And constantly stuck in time and this idea, romantic idea of what India used to be or what South Asia used to be. So I think there has to be that level of conversation as well, and I think that might also bring us more clarity about how are we going to have some of these dialogues. Because to be very honest, as an Indian who's lived in different countries but also lived in India and I'm currently based in Delhi, I feel that um I know that India has gone through a lot of changes in last 5 years, but uh, I think India is still very progressive in many things and many aspects that South Asian diaspora is completely unaware of,
So true.
because they have, and I think that their ideas are still so regressive about some of the things that happen in India, because they have no relationship with that country, rather than just feeling that romantic sort of alliance with the country. And I think that's where my problem is, that you're doing a disservice to the country and to the movement, because you don't want to live there, but you just want to keep evoking this identity because you're confused. So I said, don't be confused. Take the identity where you live and leave the rest, and just so that we can move on and really build society that we want to build no matter where we are. Because world is open. I
Yeah.
mean, these boundaries and borders are really man-made. So,
Yeah. Wow, I couldn't agree more with you. My relationship with the diaspora is very complicated and something that I navigate on my day-to-day basis, because I am this sort of alien who speaks well, who is modern, who is, independent, lives alone, and they just don't. I mean, even that sort of, is strange to them, because this idea of Indian women are still, just in shambles in India, and they have no independence, they have no freedom. Sort of really does disservice to how much Indian women fight the patriarchy on a day-to-day basis, on a systemic level, how much the queer community, the trans community in India, challenge the power on a day-to-day basis, and that never gets seen. But a Netflix original will somehow, make all of us one community, but not our day-to-day struggles, and that really does a number on me as well. Um, so lastly, Josna, if you don't mind me asking, how has your experience been when it comes to dating?
yeah, so actually, I don't really date.
Okay.
I think I've been off dating simply because I also came out as a queer person fairly recently. I think it's been a year.
Okay.
And I think that has made me really reflect upon the kind of relationships I want to have, and what I want to build in future. What are the things that I'm ready to compromise and not ready to compromise on? So there in a lot of thinking which is continuing, where I'm really I've gone through series of breakups, and I think that I'm right now in that space where I am really in a very uh, I would say introspection mode, where I am thinking. But I think my dating experience has been mixed. Um, there have been ample of dates where people asked me, so you're a Dalit, or what is your caste, or what is your last name, and all of those things. And I think that So I always felt that somebody could ask me, that was like, wow, somebody's asking me and I'm not able to say anything,
Mhm.
because you have this moment of where you get frozen and you're not sure how to respond to that. I think because there is this thing of, oh, I run Project Anti-Caste Love and I talk about all of those things, so nobody's going to ask me on a date, but I have been constantly asked, and sometimes out of curiosity, and sometimes it's also like, oh, but you don't perhaps look like a Dalit, and so all of those things, and that has made me constantly go back to Project Anti-Caste Love, and I feel like, yeah, that is why I started that project, because this is still so real. People want to know who they're out with, who they are dating, and who is this person. And I think that curiosity is fine, but I think there has to be those moments where people feel comfortable to talk about their identities and their traumas and their past experiences. I don't think it should be taken for granted that if I'm on a date, or if anybody is on a date, that's a pass for you to dig into really like what that person is coming from. I think you have to build that space for people to feel comfortable to share it with you. And I think that space is missing because, well, misogyny is rampant. I think that men really are struggling because there is this sort of fragility to masculinity where men are not sure how they can even approach women, simply because women are growing and men are still kind of stuck in some sort of time loop. And I feel like that is very sort of, yeah.
Yeah, let's end this conversation on a shrug, like, eh. Thank you so much, Jyotsna, for joining me. I had an incredible conversation with you, and really thank you for your work, and good luck with this incredible initiative. And I know that in your day to day, you talk about caste and you challenge caste, and really, really lights up my social media. And I'm always looking forward to engaging with your work. So thank you.
No, thank you, Dilpreet, for having me and for having this conversation. I think that I really see a value in engaging with the South Asian diaspora community,
Mm.
because I just feel that the work that you're doing, and like other people who are really making an effort to bring some of these conversations to wherever they are, I think that's the work we all need to do. And constantly push our practices and our politics and our thoughts. And so thank you so much for having me and really like taking our time to have this conversation. I've also really enjoyed talking to you and listening to your thoughts as well.
Thank you so much, Ratsna.